All right. Hi, Christine.
Hi there, Leslie. Good to see you again.
Yeah, really good to see you too. And I'm glad to be able to have the chance to catch up with you and
Yeah,
kind of talk again today.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Wonderful.
Yeah. So I wanted to ask you, I've occasionally students reach out to me. Actually, for a while I was getting them very frequently. It started to get
Yeah.
fewer now, but I still get students
Yeah.
in counseling programs reaching out to me. And I have one that I'm scheduled to talk with later today. And this made me think I want to get Christine's take on this. I think people want to know what do I think about what they should do in these programs. And I think, well, that's really personal. It's really individual. I know what I think I wanted to do and what I chose to do, but I don't know how to, I don't really have any guidance for someone else. It's up to each individual to make their choices. But one thing that I keep coming back to is in order to go through a counseling program right now, it's kind of like running this gauntlet of ideology that's really replaced a lot
Yes.
of what you would want to be imparted to counselors in their training.
Yes.
And it's so, it feels really traumatizing to go through
Yes.
that. And it doesn't feel like we necessarily should have to put up with that in order to come out the other end and get a profession. Why should you have to go through that psychological abuse in order to come out and be able to get
Yes.
licensed into a profession? And yet there's still valuable information being taught and valuable skills being taught. And you can't just throw it all away and throw the baby out with the bathwater and say, just, you know, skip the training and go call yourself a coach if you want to do it. You can't do that either.
Right.
So do you see what I mean? It just feels like a
Yeah.
very fraught situation. And I wonder, what are your thoughts about this as someone who has made a career teaching counselors?
Yes. Well, I think this is just such the most perfect timing that this came up or that we're talking about this today because as I mentioned to you earlier, I had a death in the family and I was with some folks that I don't know very well. It was on my husband's side of the family.
Mhm,
And they asked me what I do for a living. And it was kind of difficult because I'm not really practicing as a therapist at the moment.
mhm,
And then that kind of leads to why am I not?
mhm,
And why am I not teaching? So it's like this bizarre space of what is it that I'm actually doing right now? What is my job? What is, even if I'm just volunteering or whatever, what is it that I'm actually doing? It's so hard to describe because it does open up this sort of massive can of worms with groups that may not be aware of the infiltration and the depth of the infiltration that's
mhm,
happened. So I am trying to find my way in reestablishing or gaining some sort of footing or some ground in what I am going to do going forward. I mean, I absolutely love the field. And I think in a lot of ways, had built up some resentment, which I'm working through because I feel that that was taken away from
mhm,
me
mhm,
in a
mhm,
sense, and that I can go and speak out all day long, but I am not a huge policy decision maker. I'm not a lawmaker. The most I can do is provide awareness or provide information if it's sought out or if somehow somebody puts me in touch with someone who wants it, and I'm happy to do that. But I don't really have a good answer for that because I just I don't know what, it's sort of like thinking about revisiting seeing clients again.
mhm,
Somebody told me yesterday at this event that that he went to a therapist recently and the therapist was um he'd been seeing her for a while, but anyway, some stuff was going on with some things with his, profession. And the therapist kind of said, started talking to him in a way that was very clear. Okay. And he, this client, this friend of ours, okay,
mhm,
he's not somebody that's, well versed in psychology.
mhm,
He's not well versed in the field or anything like that. Okay. He's just a layperson when it comes to this. So he's with this therapist and she ends up saying something about, the real issue, it sounds to her, is the struggle he's having, like, with his privilege, or
Oh, wow.
yeah, like, well, that sounds very much like somebody who's been privileged. And how do you think your privilege
Hmm,
as, a white male has influenced X, Y, and Z? And he said he was just so put off that he stopped
hmm,
seeing her.
hmm,
And, you know, the first thing I thought was, oh my gosh, okay, I have a magazine, article, freelance magazine writer who I want to put you in touch with, who's looking for patients and clients, whichever
mhm.
way you call it, that are having problems with woke-ish, or, let's just say critical social justice. I'll kind of keep it there.
Mhm,
Minded therapists, they're not hearing from clients yet. There's a
mhm.
lot of the professional pieces are coming out. It's the
Right.
clients that they want to hear from. And this is a perfect example of somebody who really just didn't really know anything about this stuff, but it was so apparent because the ideology was brought right into the room, front and center. It's almost a grooming, in a sense, of
Wow.
that. For him to sit and say to me, somebody again who just really doesn't touch or know much about this, he's sort of checked out, he's in a different,
Mhm,
whatever social circle even.
mhm, mhm,
To say that this came up, and because of that and her political leanings, which were very clear in the room, he felt he was getting biased information or biased responses rather than
mhm,
unbiased. It
mhm.
was that clear,
So
which then goes to
this is a
prove
yeah,
exactly what I said when I
yeah,
first left 2 years ago, which is, I'm not patting myself on the back here, but a prediction I made, which was a clear conclusion with facts. I mean, this
mhm,
isn't,
mhm,
like I magically, I'm clairvoyant here. I mean, we're talking about, I had said, the way that these students are learning, this is going to impact and influence the way that they practice, and they're going to harm clients. There you go.
mhm,
It's not 2 years later that
mhm,
casually at,
mhm,
an event for a death, memorial for somebody in the family who died, casually this comes up, and there it
mhm,
is. And then I wonder
mhm.
how many more people are feeling that way who are clients that I haven't met. So,
Yeah, so this is just coming out unsolicited,
yes.
from
Yes.
someone in a random circumstance, and you're hearing about
Yeah.
how it's souring people on their
Yeah.
therapy experiences.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
Absolutely. And
yeah.
I just, so, so I don't know that you can get through, and that's the struggle, right? Because the
Mhm,
struggle is, do you get through the program
mhm,
and try to keep that out as much as possible and take what you like and leave the rest? Can you
mhm,
do that? Is it possible? Or does it infiltrate to a point that you almost kind of have to buy it a little to get
yeah.
through it? I don't, because you won't
That's a
pass your
really good
classes
question.
either,
That's a
right?
good point. Yeah.
When the teachers or the professors are assessing
Mhm,
whether you have that critical lens, okay, then that's something you have to demonstrate, which means you either
mhm,
go against your own values and principles and sort of do what you think they want to hear and then do your own thing later,
mhm,
or you change course. I mean, what are the other options? I don't know, because I don't even know what the other options are for me at this point in my life. I mean, I'm involved with some of these things, as we were talking about.
mhm, mhm.
um, but can I go back to practice? I don't know. I don't know what the clients would be like at this time, or how. I don't know, actually. Maybe that would be great. I don't know. I feel compelled to keep speaking out. I feel compelled to keep putting this stuff front and center.
Mhm.
But what is it exactly I'm doing as a living? I mean, I wouldn't say I'm a public speaker. I wouldn't, I don't even know that I'm an
Yeah.
educator, not formally. So that's something I thought about. And what also came up, by the way, is
Mhm.
um somebody who I was talking to, I think, I don't remember which day, but oh yes, I don't remember. I'm doing another podcast, I think, a couple days with somebody that found me through the CTA network. And anyway, this, kind of topic came up of, can you use your position? So me as a non-white woman,
Mm.
can I use my position where I'm being empowered by these agendas and ideologies and critical social, can I use that
Mm.
and then influence how I teach class so that I can de-wokeify or de-critical social justice-ify the
Mm.
classroom, right?
So
So
basically go in
anyone,
as like you know, a counter,
a
like do some
counter,
subversion, but like on the
yes,
sly in these classes.
yes,
Okay.
subversion on the
Yeah.
sly.
Mm,
That's the perfect way to put it.
mm,
And it was interesting because as we were sort of talking this through, I said, that is where the problem is though, because then in order for me to be able to be heard and or those things to be heard, they have to be
mhm,
heard from somebody who doesn't, fit this profile of the oppressor group.
mhm.
Is that ethical that that I would be using that to
Yeah,
turn
it's
it on
layered.
its ear,
Mhm.
And actually it was a podcast guest. I'm sorry, it was a that's now I remember who it was. And it's interesting because, he's, we were interviewing him. He was one of the
Mm,
writers, for the book. And
mhm.
you know, him pointing that out, it was something that I had, thought about for some time. Maybe I'm just going to be, I can use this and be that voice so that when you're
Right.
in my class, we can get rid of it. And when you're, in your other classes, I can't control that.
Mhm.
So, but at the same time, it was almost using the weapon to actually do the same thing, but on the reverse. It's just the whole
Right.
principle of it.
Well, and
Like while we're getting
you'd
rid of
be,
tyrants, you don't want to become one.
yeah, exactly. Become one in order to fight them. And
Yes.
it's the same thing
I
as
don't
what
know.
you were saying about going through school. If you go through the program and you have to give so much lip service to it, are you really coming out of it still with your integrity intact? And so if
Yes.
you were to go into teaching again and use that as your sort of your
Yes.
disguise in order to
Yes.
subvert, you'd have to give it so much lip service in order to get to that point.
That's
And
exactly right.
so would you really feel like your integrity was intact?
Right.
Hmm.
That's the issue. So I don't have a good answer for
Yeah.
folks that are starting off because we're a long way away. I mean, there's some movement that's being made. I was speaking to somebody earlier who's who's a social worker, and I worked with him in the past, and he was talking about, the introduction of some of these ideas that children may not be gender dysphoric at the age of 5. Okay, that's
Hmm.
too young to diagnose. Maybe we need to return to a different way of talking about that. So that was hopeful. But I don't know that those bright spots of hope here and there where some of these conversations are starting to happen are enough to move the pendulum in
Right.
some reasonable way. I don't see that being possible in the next, short period of time. I think this is going to take years. I
Yeah.
don't want to sound pessimistic, but
Hmm.
I think it's going to take years of pushback, but not even pushback. It's actually really creating a parallel. I just go back to what you first said, Leslie, a long time ago
Hmm.
about, a parallel profession in a
Hmm.
sense. Um, you know?
Yeah, I mean, it seems like that I could see there's this, like you're saying, this kind of slow return, like this really slow, gradual sort of thing, shift that would have to happen in order to get back, and it would take a long time. Or there's going to have to be something dramatic that changes, and we have
Yes.
enough of a pushback and enough of a buzz in this profession to really get some some swift accountability
Yes.
from, like, the accrediting organizations would have to take a strong stand on this.
Yes.
And I don't
Yes.
know if I really see that happening, since those are that's
Well,
where this
that's
rhetoric is coming from right now.
exactly right.
But
So,
I do feel like the quandary really, and where I personally experienced it was, I was trying to go through, I did recognize this stuff really early on, but I valued the degree that I was going to get and the licensure that I was going to apply for, and a career that I thought I was going to track my way into through doing this work. And I valued that so much that I was
yes.
willing to just keep plugging away and trying to just carefully choose my words so that I wasn't too untrue to myself when I was having to,
Yes.
like you're saying, you have to prove this cultural competence stuff. And I would try
Yes.
to frame it in a way that I could agree with. But sometimes it felt like I was walking a tightrope. And then
Yes.
push finally came to shove with this civility pledge, and they pushed me to a
Yes.
point where I was like, okay, I can't do this and not violate my conscience at this point, because and there had been too many times where I'd come too close to violating my own conscience. And so I feel like there's probably quite a spectrum of people going into these programs. There's some people who are like fully on board with
Yes.
the social justice stuff and even pushing it farther. Like you talked about in your classes, you had students who pushed
Yes.
you further down that
Yes.
route, right?
Yes,
So
I
you got
did.
students that are gung ho for it and all about it. And then you've got students who are where somewhere in the middle, and then students all the way on the other end who are able to say, no, I recognize this and I don't agree with this.
Yes.
And so what you're churning out then for people who complete the program are people who are either even more emboldened in their social justice
Yes.
perspective, or people who have been somewhat compromised in their own
Yes.
integrity, you know?
And that's
So
problematic on
yeah,
both
yeah,
sides. So the
yeah,
ideologues should not be in this profession, and at the same time, people that are compromising integrity shouldn't either in order to get through it.
right.
It's
And it
not
seems
personal
like you
attack.
have to then recover.
Yeah.
Like there's a
Yes.
recovery period. What do you
Yes.
do in order to, and
Yes.
I feel like that's a lot of the people I've met through CTA are people who were recent students and are new professionals, and they're
Yes.
kind of grappling with what their own experience was in going through these programs and working on recovering and finding solid, footing again,
Yeah, and I think I mean, I completely agree. And I think the other, issue, is that, you don't just get your degree and that's it. You go on and you practice and you can do your own thing. Then you're under supervision, right? So
Hmm.
you're under supervision. So now you're dealing with the clinical supervisors who are going to, provide guidance or supervision that's going to lean in a direction. I mean, as it is, clinical supervisors have, or, clinical orientations generally,
Hmm.
they're more eclectic nowadays, but, even if they have a very clearly defined, modality or
Hmm.
orientation, they're still injecting critical social justice into the supervising treatment of the clients that these newly graduated, students are facing. So
Hmm.
it's like just another level
Hmm.
of where you have to kind of battle that,
The pressure.
the pressure.
Hmm.
And that's on the evaluations now for clinical supervisors is does this trainee, does this intern, understand or show culture competency or social justice, is practicing social justice, whatever,
Hmm. Hmm.
principles and values. Okay, so there's that level. Then the next level above that then is then the testing, right, to get licensed.
Hmm.
Because a lot of now you have to take a law and ethics test. For me, back in my day, we didn't have that. I
Hmm.
escaped it.
Hmm.
We had, multiple choices in case study, but it wasn't the same. Now those ethics and laws tests are going to, in my prediction here, incorporate what
Hmm.
CAMFT and our other ethics boards in, other states and, et cetera. Our ethics boards, though, those tests are going to incorporate components of what the ethics board says is the
Hmm.
ethical way to practice. And you're going to have to know that and learn it. And then again, get through that part of it.
So you're going to have to
Um,
attest to it both, not just
Correct.
throughout the entire school program, but also during supervision. And then also just in order to get the
Get
license,
the
you're going to have to
license.
sign your little social justice pledges again.
Yes, that's
Yeah.
exactly right. And I
Mhm.
think that's going to be, do you have does somebody have kind of the wherewithal to kind of
Mhm.
go with it
Mhm.
just for the sake of getting through all the way to that point and practice how you like? I do believe that you can you can change though. I mean, I think, for me, I I think I saw a dangerous point where I could have morphed into what I didn't want to be, even if I didn't
Mm.
align with it and just tried to look the other way or do something different. There comes a point in time where I don't know I don't know how sustainable it would have been for me to do that
Mhm.
for all those years, from being a student all the way through licensure. It's a long time. I mean, it took me
Yeah.
6 years to finish.
So when you say you could have morphed into something you don't wanna be, what do you mean by that? Would you have started to, just adhere to the rhetoric? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah.
Yeah?
Yeah, because I think there's so when you're there's so much coming at you all the time. I mean, even with the textbooks, and I know you talked about this a little
Mhm.
bit with
Mhm.
videos on like the required text. Well, the required texts get updated. We have a lot of say, as instructors on the kind
Mhm.
of text, that we present. But, again, that component, that's in the rubric and in the required
Mhm.
syllabus has to have this kind of diversity piece.
Mhm.
And a lot of these works of theorists of the past, who've done great work, a lot of their stuff has been taken and diversified. They've injected the whatever,
Mhm.
critical social justice, insert here, whatever word you want to use,
Mhm.
into it to
Mm.
create these kind of new textbooks that
Wow.
refer to the original authors,
So they actually
but
they
they,
have editing rights for these classic, are you saying
well,
like these
here's
foundational,
here
writers? Wait, so they
so
edit
here's what they
them?
do. No,
Okay.
okay, so here's what they do. Okay, I'll tell you this from the family systems class because that one
Okay.
is probably the most clearly done, and overt, I would say. So they'll take the family systems theory book, right? Which
Mhm.
the whole and family systems one is what I taught. I didn't teach the advanced, I taught the intro.
Mhm.
So you have all the different theorists,
Mhm.
and mothers and fathers of, sorry, company in the back. Anyhow, I think we're all used to this in
Yeah,
today's
yeah.
podcast.
Yeah.
But so they would take the theory and the model, and you'd learn it, and they teach you in the whole thing, and they would, of course, give the rights to the original creators and
Mhm.
inventors, or authors. Then they would have their own take that they
Mm.
would put as part two of that same
Okay.
chapter,
Mhm.
where then they would say, okay, how do we insert
Oh my
diversity?
gosh.
How do we
Okay.
now create, right? From now you have the structure.
Mm.
Now we're going to build, and we're going to add this other layer, because now
Mhm.
we know more as we've
Mhm.
moved through that, and we understand the importance and significance. I mean, that's the thing too. The buy-in of the buy-in
Mhm.
is so prevalent, because the therapists are going to be more open to that. We're just by nature of what we do going to want to watch the evolution of other human beings and
Mhm.
society and relationships. It's what we do. I mean, our
Mhm.
our work is relationships, and how we see people relating to their own worlds and environment, and that's how they would do it in these texts. So anyway, so that
Mhm.
textbook is how, that's one example of a way that they do it.
Okay.
So
So it's just like an addendum, really.
it's an addendum.
Mhm.
So, so there's nothing plagiarizing about it at all. It's an addendum.
Yeah.
They're giving credit for the original. So that's what that book looked like.
Mhm.
So that book the year before, or 2 years before that, the first, second edition, no. But by the time we were at edition, whatever it was, when I was teaching
Mhm.
the class, that's what
Mhm.
had happened, is that edition had inserted, um, after each model, in practice, applying social justice theories or concepts. How does that impact the implementation of this type of treatment? How would you implement the treatment incorporating those components? Yikes.
Mhm.
That's
Yeah.
where it's hard to get away,
So it's
and it's
just
easy to
in
get right.
everything.
Yeah, because
Yeah.
even as an instructor, if we're going to be reviewing, and I used to kind of, I mean, I had a lot of different ways that I would teach the class, but this one in particular, because family therapy is kind of, it's complicated to teach, it's complicated to
Mhm.
do.
It's one of my
So
favorite things to study in school.
I mean, it's amazing. It's so much fun. That's like one of
Mhm.
the parts of when I
It was
worked
so
with addiction.
eye-opening to me, just
Oh
so
yeah,
so interesting.
it really is. It's eye-opening. It's interesting. You can understand kind of how we play out our own family dynamics
Mhm.
in the different social or work environments we're in, all of our different communities we belong to, that type of thing. It's incredible. But so those pieces of the chapter or of the model had to kind of be taught too.
Mm,
So there needed to be on my end a little buy-in. Now, what did I do? Okay, well, I shook it up and said, forget all that. You're
mm,
going to now study the case of, and again, I cannot remember who was in this, but that there was a movie that came out in 2016 or something like that
mm,
about a gay kid going to conversion therapy, and it was
mm.
his true story. And it was,
Okay.
I think it was Nicole Kidman played the mom and Russell Crowe
Mm,
played the dad. It's
okay. I
yeah,
didn't see it, I don't think.
yeah. So I
Mhm,
kind of then turned it a bit on its heel by doing that, to try to say, okay, let's get away from it. I kind of went the opposite way and said, how would you work with this family?
mhm,
How do you find a point of compassion for the dad?
mhm, mm. Oh, interesting.
Yeah, like
Is the dad a rejecting dad in this, and
yeah. So the
trying to
dad,
find out?
yes,
Oh, so
the
that's interesting because
yes,
that's a really,
yes,
I think that's where one of the most glaring inconsistencies in this whole thing really lies,
yes,
is that you're not you're actually, the compassion is being trained out of you for certain
correct.
types of people.
Yes, it's
And
being
it's
trained out.
yeah, it's actively being trained out of
Absolutely.
counselors for certain groups, like when they would
Yes.
refer to the Trump supporter or whatever it might be,
Yes.
yeah,
Correct.
the one that's supposed to be vilified. And in this case, it would be the father of the who's
Yes.
rejecting the child. So you're trying to say, okay, well, how do you connect to this person to help
Yes.
them improve communications within their family
Yes.
system? Like
Exactly.
you still have to see him as a person.
You still have to see him as a person. So
Mhm.
so that was my way of kind of getting out of that piece that's
Well, that's
telling
really
you,
interesting.
if you don't, so we need to vilify the dad. So the way
Yeah.
I approached it is like, okay, listen, okay, let's look at the dad for a minute. The dad's very Christian, okay? That's
Mhm.
fine. The dad believes his core belief is that you're going to go to hell.
Mm.
So his way of showing you love
Mhm.
is to protect you from hell. I mean,
Right.
ultimately, that's what it was. I mean, it came out later, actually. The guy who wrote it was based on a true story. The true story, he talked about his relationship with his father and what ended up happening even long after the movie ended. But the movie only captured a point in time. But let's
Mhm.
start with the assumption that this dad loves his child.
Okay.
So he so much so believes in whatever these values and beliefs of his are, whether you agree or don't, that his
Mhm.
child's going to go to hell. So in his way, him trying to kind of push conversion therapy
Mhm.
was actually what he believed to be loving, to
Mhm.
assure that his child would get a place in heaven. So if
Mhm.
we can drop everything and start from that place, that the father actually does love his son, he
Mhm.
fears for his soul. Okay, do we think it's ridiculous? Yes. Okay, of course. I mean,
Mhm.
it's
Mhm.
nuts, but dad doesn't believe it's nuts. And
Mhm.
if you want to make a relationship with the dad and keep that family coming back, you can't make dad feel nuts. You have to be able to step in his shoes for a moment and
Yeah.
say, wait a minute, I don't think that he's evil. I
Right.
think that he loves his kid and this is what he knows
Mhm.
and this is what he thinks is going to be best for his kid. So now that we have that, we've
Mhm.
already started from compassion and we've already started from a shared humanity connection point. Now we don't have to vilify him. Now that we don't have to vilify him, we can actually work with him, right? And the
Wow.
family. Just
It's amazing that that feels so refreshing to hear, because that sounds like what, I mean, that it really sounds like what you should be doing in therapy, is helping people to draw connection
yes,
and find their shared value and
yes,
understand one another's core
yes,
motivations. And so, but and I'm hearing more and more about people being advised by therapists to, quote, go no contact with toxic family members. And so there's
yes.
that,
They
like,
are doing that.
what is, and that, how can you talk a little bit
So
about that? Like, how did that, how does that make any sense? I mean, I can see situations where that would make sense, unfortunately, but it feels like it's more reactionary right now.
yeah, it is because if the narrative that's sort of running is so self-righteous and it's
Mhm,
so, kind of just narcissistic and it's just and its essence is very narcissistic and very righteous. There's
mhm,
always going to be an
mhm,
answer and that this is the case. It's a closed loop, of thinking type of
mhm,
thing. I think the problem is that because it is that way. And the belief is that you're just wrong. There's no other way you can believe and actually be human.
Mhm.
You actually cannot have compassion if you think like that.
Mhm.
The only thing that you can do if you want to be, around people or loved by people who align with your values is to cut off the ones who don't. I mean, look, I'll give you this kind of personal, but maybe not so connected, but kind of connected example. My
Mhm.
father has Alzheimer's,
Mhm.
and he'll write me these text messages about, hey, can you change, the next time you come, we need to wash the sheets. Okay, well, we just washed the sheets yesterday, and
Mhm.
yes, we'll do it again. And then I'll get a text message the next day going, we need to change the sheets. We didn't do that when you were here, but we did, right?
Mhm. Mhm.
So I have a couple of choices. I can argue with a man who has this illness that is debilitating and
Mhm.
impacts his way of thinking, piss myself off, not want to see him, and say, forget it. You're
Mhm.
driving me up a wall.
Mhm.
Or I can say, this is an ill person. He's doing
Mhm.
the best he can. This is all, all he's got. Let me just give him the benefit of the doubt and let him have that. Okay.
Mhm.
Let
Mhm.
me not fight it. Let me not fight my point. Now,
Mhm.
it may not seem to be related because Alzheimer's, is a different kind of an illness, but the idea of not fighting a point or
Mhm.
pushing back on a point and accepting, for who they
Mhm.
are, what they are, and
Mhm.
drawing a boundary around that,
Mhm.
is much more effective in your own, I think, you know, inner kind of place of existing and in your relationship to that person. That is
Mhm.
what's being completely sort of dismissed. It's
Well,
almost like,
it's being able to say I love you more than I care about being right.
yes. And you know who said that once, by the way? Who I just can't stand? Dr. Phil. I mean,
Oh,
I
really?
cannot stand the guy. But ages ago,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
10, 15 years ago, maybe I watched an episode where he said that you want to be right or do you want to be happy or loved?
Mm,
That's
mhm,
and that's exactly what you're talking about. I mean, and
mhm,
it's the reason that, for me, the Alzheimer's, why I compare that is because there's nothing I'm going to be able to do with that. That
mhm,
is going to get worse even and with time. So I mean, there's just not, so we're talking about the strictest kind of wall and barrier possible. There's no opportunity to learn
mhm,
something different, right?
mhm,
So in these other cases, maybe there's an opportunity to learn something different.
mhm, mhm,
Maybe not, maybe to some extent, that's comfortable, and maybe not. But at the end of the day, what's it worth to you? You're either going to fight and say no and cut off and have all sorts of internal turmoil and damage. And I mean, I could tell you stories about my own choices that were disastrous based on that kind of thinking. Or,
mhm, mhm,
you can find that bit of compassion. Oh, my dad's Alzheimer's. Okay, I can find the bit of compassion because
mhm,
he's ill.
mhm.
Find that bit of compassion that's how that person thinks. I'm not going to change their mind. So now what do I do with that?
Right.
Cut off or manage the relationship with boundaries. Why that is not something that's being talked about more now, it's beyond me, because when I was a student, this is how we were taught.
Mhm,
That was the frame and the lens, right? It wasn't about, because we didn't have this kind of morality high horse that's going on right now. We didn't have this whole, better than, or, holier than thou kind of perspective. So there was no, we gave people the space to have different values and morals and still be considered good human beings.
mhm. I think that's such a key point right there. What you're saying is the space to have different values and morals and still be good human beings. Like, who gets to decide
Right.
what political party you belong to in order to be a good person, or
Right.
what subset of views around certain social relationships or phenomenon. It's just it's really interesting that we're in this phase where counseling
Hmm.
stresses activism and advocacy for specific groups over relationship, over the
Yes.
quality of relationships in one's life.
Yeah.
And I
Even as a young person, my mom and her siblings and that, so my maternal side, they got all their dysfunctions and quirks and whatnot. But I mean, I have these memories of childhood where they would just argue at holiday parties and scream and shout and get in heated debates about politics. I mean,
mm,
most of my family was Republican with a
Mm,
handful of Democrats, because a lot of Middle Eastern families that come here, they're very, a lot of them want to start businesses and they want to be left alone. They just
mm,
align more with kind of what the Republican value set tends to be. And they're
mm,
about family and about, we all live next to each other and
mhm,
let's, have our business, and we don't want to be controlled. We've come from regimes that are controlling. So, that's always, I grew up in a house where, my mom was Republican, my dad wasn't. I mean,
mhm,
and that's
mhm,
not, abnormal
mhm,
that you're Middle Eastern and Republican. Actually, my dad was in the not norm. But
mm,
anyhow, among all these sisters and brothers of my mother, I mean, I just, they would scream and shout. There'd be like the two or three kind of the it would be the two or three liberal ones actually
mhm,
that would scream and shout. But they all ended up doing that, and then they'd
mhm,
just be like, okay, so all right, everybody, let's make some coffee and pull out the cake. you
mhm.
know it was nothing. It
So
didn't
they were able
matter.
to have their conflict and then also set it aside and have their connection.
Yeah, they could
Mhm,
set aside and have their connection without cutting each other off, or without it being like this, impossible
mhm,
experience. And the problem, I think, too, is like, the more that this divide grows, it's worsening. I mean, just again, what I said earlier about the potential to become a tyrant in an effort to stop tyrants, it's pushing more people toward that direction. I've seen myself have a harder time,
mhm,
having relationships with people who have different viewpoints, because I so abhor the grip that this has had on
mhm,
everything. And I
mhm,
just want to shake people awake and say, wake up. So I've even felt it, in my own life. And so and that's not how I grew up. Like I said, they'd scream and shout at each other at these things, and it was fine. No
mhm,
one stopped talking. No one cared. They all, still, they had dysfunction in other ways.
mhm,
But when it came to that, it just didn't matter. So, to attach the value of a person based on those beliefs or their political beliefs, and
mhm,
we're qualifying that as good, bad, based on, and if you don't think that way and you're out of that scope, then you're bad. And because the consequence is so great at this time in our life, the consequences are like astronomical. Look at the consequences even from COVID. I mean, the breaking up of families and relation, all of
mhm,
this kind of stuff,
mhm,
they're so huge.
mhm.
You're seeing that people aren't getting past an impasse and agree to disagree, where that's been
Yeah.
thrown out the window almost in a lot of
It's like a
cases.
brittleness to
Yes,
relationships.
yes.
Yeah.
And the more that happens, the more then that, the people that are on the other side of the court, or,
Mhm,
or even people who are rational, common sense, and I consider myself to be mostly rational for the most
mhm,
part,
mhm.
tend to feel that then I want to push more to the right because I'm
Mm,
combating what's happening over here that seems
right,
so extreme.
right.
So that's where you start to get, in my
Start to
view, what
feel
I've
yourself.
seen, yes, and
Yeah.
what I've seen in other people,
Mhm,
become so much more invested with your heels in, to the point of not wanting to budge in your
mhm.
thinking on the other side of it.
Yeah, it's so
That's
interesting.
dangerous.
It's like you just it's a polarizing force.
Yes.
Yeah, socially. And this is embarrassing to admit. A few years ago, I remember being at a dinner with some people I worked with, and at the time I had always voted Democrat. I considered myself a Democrat. I had, lots of I'd done campaigning and caucusing and volunteering. I always considered myself to be a Democrat, and I made the joke. Um, Republicans think Democrats have bad ideas, but Democrats think Republicans are bad people. And
Yes.
and I made that joke, and I think I followed it with because they are,
Yes.
because that was how, and it's really embarrassing to say that I was that dug in,
I
but I
was too.
really had this very I had a worldview where, oh, the Republicans, the conservatives, they're selfish and they don't want, it's this
Yes.
basic thing, like they don't want
Yes.
poor people to have an opportunity, or they don't want
Yes.
blah blah blah. And so, I mean, I don't, obviously I do not hold those views at this point. I've had the veil has been lifted. I really
Sure.
see a lot of the political stuff that we have, that as just as a lot of theater, really. I see
Yes.
it both, kind of both parties are two wings of the same bird to me at this point,
Yes.
and I don't buy into that. But at the time I was really under that thrall, and that's what I believed. And so when you're talking, and who was I listening to just the other day? It was this great conversation. I wish I could think of who it was so I could give them credit for it, because it was really interesting. It must have been a podcast I was listening to, but they were talking about how liberals have more moral disgust. Maybe this was on, maybe it was somebody Benjamin Boyce was talking with. I think so. He was talking about liberals having more moral disgust. And so having someone disagree
Point.
with you morally is more abhorrent to
Yes.
you. And it made so
Yes.
much sense
Yes.
to me in the context of my own experiences and my own evolving worldview. And it makes sense in terms of social justice and
Yes.
the absolute rejection of people who disagree with your worldview.
Yes. Yes. This is where that word indoctrination, right? Because I believe that started for me, or I mean early. I don't think, I mean, I don't think this is all that. No, I know this is not new. It's just
Mhm.
that maybe the depth of the damage is being coming to the surface now, but that kind of indoctrination, like, where did you, like, do you remember where you learned that? Because I learned that too. That, like,
Mm,
if you're a Republican, you're just a bad person. I mean, I
mm,
never saw my mother that way, but I, would just split that away from her back in the day, so compartmentalized. But
mm,
it's I don't remember where I learned it, but I know
mm.
I did, and I grew up in California in the Bay Area. Where was that first injected? And I'm wondering if you have a sense of when you first learned that Republicans were bad people.
That is a really good question. I grew up in Texas,
Yeah.
and
Oh,
I
I
grew
didn't
up,
know that.
yeah, I'm from
I don't
San
think.
Antonio.
Yeah. Wow.
And I grew up in South Central Texas, um, pretty poor area, pretty, uh, it's kind of a, I guess it's a blue
Hmm.
city in a red state, or maybe it's kind of a purple. I don't
Yeah.
know.
Purple.
But
Yeah.
yeah, my mom was Republican, my dad was Democrat, also like your family. And
Right.
um I don't know where I would have first really heard that. I when I was in college, I volunteered for a couple of environmental groups, but I still think of them as, those were really good experiences, and they were really important groups, because San Antonio's water system is fed by a
Hmm.
karst aquifer, a limestone aquifer, and we were always dealing with people wanting to build over the aquifer
Oh
recharge zone,
gosh.
which is this terrible pollutant to
Yeah.
the
Yep.
drinking water. And so
Yep.
these groups were trying to prevent that. And so it was like basically aquifer protection groups.
Hmm.
And so I was working with these groups, and the developers in the city, the people who didn't care at all about the environmental protections tended to be
Yes.
the Republicans, and the
Yes.
environmentalists tended to be the Democrats. So that was really
Yes.
formative for me. And I
Yes.
think another formative aspect of this was George W. Bush and the
Yes.
reaction to 9/11, and this
Yes.
like reflexive, let's go bomb
Yes.
Afghanistan, which seemed so crazy to me. So
Yes.
I think this was kind of when I sort of developed this concept of the Republicans as these greedy,
Yes.
sort of war hungry, resource grabbing, uncaring, in it for myself kind of. Yeah, I just pictured Dick Cheney and Halliburton, and just, Donald Rumsfeld, all these characters that were, I think that's
Oh yeah.
probably where I developed that. Now that I think about it, I would say it was that time
So you were
frame.
probably in your early 20s,
Yeah, I was
maybe around there?
my mid-20s.
Yes.
Yeah,
Really formative years, right? For kind of ideas and
yeah.
ideas that you, let me ask you that, kind of off topic. What did you think of the Clinton and Lewinsky scandal?
Oh, that's a good question.
And I'm throwing it out there because, it kind of crushed, I think, some people, at least this came up in some of the
Mhm,
family discussions, the
mm,
idea that Democrat presidents, or Democrats in general, whatever, are just more morally, intact, so to speak. So I'm curious
yeah.
if you had any thoughts back then about that situation.
Hmm. I I
Like, did he
think
get leeway for it, you know? I don't
I
know.
think I was kind of I think I kind of tended to turn a bit of a blind eye to it, and I think, you know, I thought he was a bit sleazy. There were all
Yeah.
the different women whose
Yeah.
names were coming up,
Yeah.
and he seemed like a bit of a cad.
Yeah.
My ex-husband, he was like he thought the Clintons were terrible. His
Mm,
family
mhm,
was Republican, and
mhm,
he had
mhm.
read some book about the Clintons and how they had, they had this crime family and whatever. And
Yes.
so that was his perspective. I tended to I guess I was kind of Machiavellian about it because I thought the
Yeah.
Republicans were the bad guys. And so it was like, well, he's our guy. He may not be perfect, but he's our guy.
Yeah.
And so that
Yeah.
was kind of it's kind of an embarrassing thing to admit, but I kind of turned a blind eye to some things. Ultimately, also, I think there's the question of like, when somebody's your representative, do you care more about their personal affairs? And I don't mean affairs as in infidelities, I mean their personal
Yes.
life,
Yes.
or do you care more about their policy? And now I don't know enough. I was really young and I wasn't that checked
Oh,
into
yeah.
it. So I don't know enough about whether I would approve of all of his
Right.
policy decisions. But I think I don't know. I think it was not on my radar enough for me
Yeah.
to develop a strong like stance on what I thought about it. What about yourself?
Yeah, because you know, I mean, I went to Catholic school and
Mhm,
Catholic high school. My Catholic school, though, high school was not very, it wasn't conservative really almost
mhm,
at all. I mean, we had it was gay and lesbian at the time.
mhm.
Maybe bisexual. LGB, I think we
Okay.
didn't have the Q yet. We didn't have questioning yet, but it
Mhm,
was so it was fine. They had a club on campus. They went to the prom together, gay students, lesbian students, and
mhm. That's
nobody, they weren't bullied. They weren't
pretty progressive for a Catholic school in
huge.
the 90s, right?
Yes, in the 90s,
Yeah.
right? I graduated in 97. So yes,
Mhm,
so hugely progressive.
mhm,
So all of the like the homophobia stuff or the gay marriage stuff, I
mhm,
was never kind of moved by because I thought,
mhm,
well, we didn't treat them any different and we didn't like not grant, I don't know. We didn't, okay, that whole color blindness, okay, like
mhm,
applied to, sexual
mhm,
orientation blindness. I don't know
mhm.
what the word would be. So I don't,
Wasn't a point
know,
of controversy for you at that
no.
point,
And it
yeah.
wasn't really for almost
Mhm,
anyone. But
mhm,
and so I think though the leaning at the time was that um Democrats were more accepting of that and
mhm,
pro-human
mhm, mhm,
and they assured that those people would have rights and they assured women's rights and they assured
mhm,
um policies to take care of you if something bad happens. And the Republicans are the rich people party. I mean, they're the
mhm,
ones that want to take, all of your money and they don't they pay less taxes. And I didn't understand either. I mean, the correlation between, taxes on businesses and how that impacts jobs and job
mhm,
availability and why, one company might move to another state and because of the tax situation and how that could be positive and negative depending on what side of the football, depending on what part of. I mean, these are all complicated things for somebody I think that's younger. I almost kind of feel like they don't teach you on purpose. You just sort of remain, dumb, not dumb,
mhm.
but
Surface level, like
uninformed.
you just
Yeah.
understand on a very shallow, like this party is
Yeah.
populist and this party is
Yeah.
elitist, and that's all you need
And
to
that's
know.
all.
Yeah.
And I didn't, I always believe, I always had some conspiracy kind of theory in me.
Mhm,
I never trusted the government really anyway, though. So I think I was
mhm,
always really conflicted too. But
mhm,
I thought the better deal was with the Democrats. So I
mhm,
believed that, they were going to eventually be able to listen to us in our private homes. They can do that now. I
mhm,
believed that, eventually, the whole goal was to like globalize and take over. And, there's all this, bad dealings with the Rothschild families and the Rockefellers. I believed all of that when I was young.
mhm,
At the same time, I also was thinking that again, the Democrats assured, that the gays and lesbians and the whomevers would all have their rights respected. So
mhm,
that it was kind of conflicting because I didn't really trust their politics though either, if that makes sense.
Mhm,
I
mhm,
because I believed at the end of the day that government in general was out to get us. I actually had very little trust, as just as a young person, and believed that there was a world order that they were trying to
mhm.
get to, and that eventually we're going to have chips in our bodies
Yeah.
and AI, and you're going to be able to pay without using cash, and they're
Mhm.
going to track where your money goes. I believed all that, and now they can do it all. I mean, it's insane, but this is stuff that I thought when I was 16.
Right. Wow. So you were aware of those things
I
from early on.
was. I
It
was.
sounds like you had a broad strokes acceptance of this one, like like one
Yes.
party has your best interest at heart, might as well throw yourself in with them. And then you had some
Yes.
areas of general cognitive dissonance, but maybe you were able to blur your eyes and just go with
Sure.
this one
Yeah.
party for the most part.
That's how I felt, and
Okay.
my sister as well, which is why my sister has never registered for anything other than independent. She's been an independent her whole life from the age
Hmm.
of 18. So there's a heavy influence probably, I think, that she had on me. She's older and whatnot. So I think that's
Hmm.
part of it,
Hmm.
because I also had a real strong belief in, you know, hands off government, that they didn't
Hmm.
belong in my business. Again,
Hmm.
I thought they were going to be spying on me. So I didn't, want that. And I thought that, you know, uh, Republicans tended to focus less on big government. They were more decentralized in their approaches. I mean, I think that's how
Yeah.
so yeah, it's sort of what I mean, it's exactly what you said. It's just there's kind of this one piece. So then I just kind of went there. And it wasn't because I
Yeah.
fully adopted, but it made sense, because on the other side of it though, I also thought, gee, they want control over us by taking all of our money, and they want to
Yeah.
control what we do, and we need to fight back and rise up. I mean, I was a little kind of out there for my
Yeah.
age and at that time. Not, I mean, today people say this stuff, but
Yeah. But it was kind of different for somebody to be saying it then. It
yeah,
was pretty
yeah.
forward thinking. But so it sounds like you did have a sense of an overall, I guess like an overlayer of corruption over the whole thing,
Oh yeah.
or something like that. And so,
And I didn't believe, I did not care about a president's personal life either,
mhm,
by the way.
mhm,
It was,
mhm,
to me, I didn't care if the person was a good person, a bad person. All I cared about was that that person cared about America enough
mhm, mhm.
to make sure the citizens here were taken care of, and I didn't care beyond that.
Do you
So,
believe that now? And do you believe that the president has any power anymore? Or what are your thoughts about this now at this point with the two-party system and
well, I don't, I mean, the checks and balances, I mean, if I'm going to get really controversial here, I don't think the checks and balances system that we learned about is great in theory, but this is not how it's being applied today. It is a one part, in my viewpoint at this time, it is a one party, you know, kind of ownership,
mm,
because I believe that the corruption is actually in both.
mm,
And so because of that, they're kind of all the same. I mean,
mm,
there's a
mhm,
few maybe who aren't. But in general, I remember even in the 80s, I mean, some jobs that were being shipped off. My parents were engineers, so they were kind of worried about if that would happen, out of the country. I remember looking, my friends and I would go and we'd check the tags. And if it was like made in China, we didn't want to buy it because we knew they had sweatshops there. And, we didn't want to support the like communism, dictatorship and whatever. So we only want to buy American. I mean, so there's this, all those patriot kind of values. And but it was just too expensive. So we're like, it's made in America. It's too expensive though. We're kids. I really want that pair of jeans though. So I'm gonna go ahead and get it. I mean, you're only socially responsible to an extent at that age. But so I think that that's something I sort of saw kind of coming from a long time ago. So I don't believe to me it's you're this we're in a situation where you're sort of pro America, or you're kind of pro globalist. I mean, it's kind of, for me, the Republican Democrat thing has lost all meaning and value. I just kind of feel like you're pro pro America, pro human ish, and then or you're pro global. And I would way rather have somebody who has not a moral inkling in their body, but cares enough about the country, or cares enough about their own reputation on how to lead and make good decisions, that would step up more so than I do about their moral character. And I wouldn't have said that a few years ago, but moral character does not do anything for me personally or any of my communities or families. I mean, it just doesn't. Um,
Yeah, it's really interesting. I
you
think
know,
it's such a big topic, and I think I I have never been. I'm sorry about the noise, by the way.
yeah,
There's
no problem.
landscaping. They do this at all weird
Weird
hours. I'm
times.
like, I can
Yeah,
never
no problem.
predict when they're going to come by.
Mm.
Um, so if anybody's hearing that buzz in the background, that's my fault. Um, but yeah, I'm certainly no political science expert. I just know my own trajectory. And I know that when I started to hear a few years ago about the walkaway movement in
Oh,
the Democrat
yes.
Party,
Yes.
that resonated with me. I
Brandon
felt like,
Straka, right?
yeah, yeah, yeah,
I met him.
exactly.
He's
Yeah,
he's an interesting guy. He's very cool.
I
Yes.
don't know enough about him. I just remember this like came on my radar and I thought,
He's
wow,
awesome.
I really I can relate to this. It's somehow
Yes.
this there enough happened. They pushed the needle too far
Yes.
and people started falling right out of the Democratic Party. They pushed too far
Yes.
left and they lost a
Yes.
bunch of us.
Yes.
And I felt myself fall into the into the center, which
Yes.
is where I still find myself. I'm
Yes.
not buying what I'm seeing on especially the
Yes.
left right now. And I'm resonating more with the right, but
Yeah.
not so much that I want to put up a new allegiance,
I
I'm not in that
no, I won't
place.
type. Yeah.
Yeah.
I
Well, that's
yeah,
interesting.
I when I quit Antioch, actually I changed my voter registration to independent.
Did you?
Yeah, it was sort of a symbol. It doesn't matter really in the grander scheme, but it was a symbolic thing for me. But that's
Yeah.
when I decided to I dumped. But I mean, I never registered as Republican, but I dumped them both, and so
Yeah.
that's where I got to this. You're either pro like humanity and humans, or you're pro this crazy global kind of takedown. I mean, whatever it is,
Mm-hmm.
that's kind
Mm-hmm.
of where my mind went, and
Mm-hmm.
it's very difficult as therapists to put out your actual views for fear of being labeled a number of things, because
Right.
this profession obviously can be very judgy, but
Mm-hmm.
look, I don't care, I mean, this is what I
Right.
think. I mean, at the end of the
Right.
day, some of the things that happened during, Obama's time, directly, impacted me very negatively, the healthcare
Mm-hmm.
situation. I've had
Mm-hmm.
multiple surgeries and stuff, and I ended up almost being bankrupt
Oh my gosh.
financially over over that. Insurance and things changed with the new, so it's like,
Mm-hmm.
great, there's some help here for this group, but over here there isn't. And so
Yeah.
I didn't care for that. I mean, I think it was
Mm-hmm.
sort of when I started to say, let me look at what's underneath the policy and who
Mm-hmm.
it benefits and
Mm-hmm.
why.
Mm-hmm.
They had this one proposition in California, I can't remember, but the National Organization for Women, now, I
Mm-hmm.
think they're still around, had said vote no. But the proposition looked like it was, oh, just if, raise your taxes by, whatever, a dollar or something small in order to put it toward this one great cause.
Mm-hmm.
And I kind of went, why is now the national organization was saying no, like this is
Mm-hmm.
directly impacting women in a positive way? And I looked and looked and I found that money had already been earmarked for that. And it's
Oh,
already been earmarked for that for a long period of time. So where did the money go? Why were
wow.
they asking to raise the tax? Where is this going to be appropriated? This is going to be misappropriated. Who's getting this money? That was when the light bulb really went off in my head. And I said, no way. You have to read between the lines, and
Right.
you have to read very deeply to understand. It was, and I learned this on my own
Mm-hmm.
just because I just was curious. I wanted to know why. I want to know who supported it and who didn't and why. And I went, oh
Mm-hmm.
my God, this is what keeps happening. Right.
Mm-hmm.
So there are a lot of multiple points in my life where those aha moments. The problem, though, I think overall was to be seeped into an environment like Antioch as a teacher. If I go back to kind of where we
Mm-hmm.
started,
Mm-hmm.
all of my independent ability to see outside of this box,
Mm-hmm.
that Antioch wants to stick everybody in, or the
Yeah.
critical social justice, let's say,
Yeah.
does not allow enough time, space, energy for me to
Mhm.
open the box wider or look outside of it. And I think
Mhm.
that's where it becomes dangerous to say, well, I'll just still believe what I believe, but I'll go and do the work the way that they want me to do it, and
Mhm.
then come home at night and be a different person or believe something differently just to get through. I couldn't
Yeah.
do it.
Yeah.
It was impacting me to where I was starting to change my mind and I on things. And I'm like, wait a minute, wait, let me take a minute here and let me go back and look.
Wow, and it's so much pressure too, and I mean, there was this is great that you brought it there because that does bring it full circle, and my experience at Antioch was not only is it the critical social justice lens, which could be viewed as a far left progressive lens,
Yeah.
but also there was direct communication relentlessly on how we were supposed to be voting and our
Yes.
political
Yes.
affiliations that we were supposed to be
It was just
supporting.
so
And
sickening.
oh, yeah, and it doesn't leave you room to critically think for yourself and decide,
No.
"Well, on this issue, I'm gonna fall over here. On this issue, I'm gonna go over here. Maybe I just completely disagree with you," whatever it is. There's no room for that because we were told directly how we were supposed to act.
That's exactly right, and you know what? It's so true because I think that, you know, voting would come up and I'd say, "Okay, well, what do the Democrats say? Because 'Cause they're the good
Mhm.
people." And I would just vote whatever they said and not look and read just
Mhm.
because. My sister
Mhm.
wasn't like that. She
Yeah,
was, again,
she'd read it.
yeah, no,
Yeah.
she was an independent, so she didn't claim she vote she's a policy voter.
Mhm,
And so
mhm, mhm.
again, some of that rubbed off on me, I think, but but I used to do that. I used to just say, well, what are they all saying? Because then I'm
Yeah.
going to just, like, I didn't vote for the homelessness, the increase in tax for homelessness. And the reason I didn't do it is because I worked with the homeless.
Mhm,
The
mhm,
bill, okay, and I don't know if we want to be this political here, but the bill was to build more housing for
mhm.
homeless, but it did not include providing mental health and the things that they needed in order to keep them housed. I worked with the
Right,
homeless.
right,
They fell out of housing in and out all the time.
right.
95% of the homeless people in Santa Monica have been housed at least once or twice minimum by the government. The
Mm.
reason they don't stay in housing is because they drop them there and they don't treat the problem.
Right, it doesn't
That
sound like it's as clear cut as just
it is
need more
not.
houses. Yeah.
It's not about that.
Mhm.
They mostly have, and I was on the streets trying to house people. That I
Mm.
had a street team in a van, and we went in and approached every single homeless person we could find in our area
Mhm.
to offer them housing.
Mhm.
And when you do that, you learn an enormous amount about the problem and
Mhm.
about why they're there and
Mhm.
about why they're not housed. And I mean, it's definitely not time to go into that here, but
No,
there's
it's a really
so
interesting topic, but yeah.
yes. And so I said no. And it was not
Mhm.
because I don't want to
Mhm.
support them. It's because it's not the answer.
Yeah.
And the answer is they're not treating the problem. And the problem is probably back when Reagan closed all the mental, institutions and nothing else came to take its place to
Mm.
help these people with mental health and or substance use. I mean, it's a majority of them. So
Mhm. Mhm.
the money's not appropriated in the right place.
Mm.
But I'm a bad person if and I've publicly said it now, so who knows? But I would have been a bad person to say that publicly in front of a lot of people. You don't want to support housing, it's because we don't have enough housing.
Uh,
No, it's complicated. It's
right,
not just
right.
that. That might be part
Yeah.
of it. It's not the whole picture.
Mhm.
And so again, for another day, why do I know that? I know that because I worked in
Yeah.
with the population and we were a contractor for the city and the county. So I saw the money piece and how that was being handled and what the goals were and why. With
Yeah.
all of that information, my entire viewpoint on how to handle the situation and give these people treatment and housing changed. So I voted no.
Yeah. Well, it's such a good example of how it's just, and this kind of ties back in even to that example of the father rejecting his child,
Yes.
his gay kid. It's more complicated than you know. And so to
Yes.
make a decision about somebody, whether somebody's good or evil because of their take on a particular thing, you might be leaving out understanding why they think the way that they do and
Yes.
what that means. And you could still disagree with them at the end of the day. You can still
Yes.
disagree, but
Yes.
maybe they're not a bad person because they think what they think.
Yes, exactly. And maybe we just need to ask why. And I think that's what made Daryl Davis so attractive and
Mhm.
fair, kind of modeled the organization after him, is
Mhm.
because, he's a black man who came out and said, before I judge you, I want to understand why
Right.
and how you think the way that you do.
Yeah.
How did you
I
come to those beliefs? And we stopped doing that. So that's a huge problem.
yeah, it's really
So
yeah, and I feel like there's so much more to say about it, but this has been a really good discussion.
yes,
And kind of
that was
veered
fabulous.
from school to
Yeah,
professional training to politics and
yeah.
back, and yeah,
I
that's
know.
but I
Yeah,
always enjoy talking with you, Christine.
I do too. Thank you so much. It's always such a pleasure.
Yeah, thank you, and,
Yes,
until next time.
absolutely. Sounds good.